visit of the Pope last Thursday here, and now we have yours. I think that's an important topic to speak of, even if it is not really easy subject, easy thematic. But I wish to thank the speakers to join us this morning, and also the organizer of this press meeting about the case of UNAIDS. And I wish now, I also apologize for the room because all our rooms were busy, so we have to come here, but I think it's also friendly and very convenient for this kind of meeting. So now I would like to give the floor to Anna Jakovic, who will be the moderator of the meeting, and we can after share the questions and answers. So please, Anna, you have the floor. I think you can speak from there.
Yes. Is it okay?
Yeah.
And I don't need to move, right? Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Ania Jakovic, and I'm a Deputy Bureau Chief of AIDS Healthcare Foundation European Bureau. And we are here in Geneva in the eve of a program coordinating board meeting at UNAIDS. We are here the day before of the meeting to raise a very important question, which is an ongoing issues of handling or not handling or mishandling the case of sexual harassment. And the Geneva press conference is the latest in the series of similar actions that we have conducted across the globe to bring this issue to the public attention. And we conducted these events in major cities in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America. And these events, but also the case itself and the cases of sexual harassment brought extensive media coverage to these issues, but also there was a very strong civil society response on these issues as well. We are addressing PCB, the program coordinating board, today because PCB as a body is tasked with establishing broad policies and priorities for the joint program, and PCB is to make recommendations to the co-sponsoring organizations regarding the activities in support of the joint program. And the asks and what AHF is calling for, we ask for a fully independent investigation of sexual harassment claims and reform process. We believe that UNAIDS culture cannot change without leadership change. And we believe that PCB has a responsibility to take action on the leadership issues and reforms, and we urge PCB to take immediate action and to show that this is an urgent case and needs to be addressed. And up till now, the UNAIDS response to the crisis has been muddled, and it did not show needed urgency. I have with me 4 speakers that will be addressing this question. I have with me Terri Ford, who is AHF Chief of Global Policy and Advocacy. I have with me Martina Brostrom, who is Senior UNAIDS staffer, who first went public with allegations of sexual harassment against UNAIDS Deputy Director. I have with me Larissa Klazinga, who is AHF Regional Policy and Advocacy Manager from Southern Africa. And we will have Ms. Prashanti Tiwari joining us via Skype from India, and she is a former UNFPA subcontractor and victim of sexual assault and a women's rights advocate. So I would like to invite the first speaker, Larissa.
Thank you all so much for being here and for being willing to listen to our perspective on what I believe is a critical issue in the AIDS response. First, let me say a little bit about my history and how I ended up in this room today. I'm from South Africa, which is a country that has both the largest number of people living with AIDS and HIV in the world. We have over 7 million people in South Africa that have HIV. We also have the highest gender-based violence rate of any country not at war currently. So there are over 55,000 rapes reported in South Africa on an annual basis. And that, in essence, means that if you're a South African woman, you have a 1 in 2 chance of being raped at least once in your lifetime. Now, I am a rape survivor, and I'm not unique in any way. I have worked for a long time, even before I started working at AHF, around issues of gender-based violence. And I was somebody that spoke out against the former president of South Africa. I participated in a campaign called the 1 in 9 campaign, which was organized to support the survivor who spoke out in that particular case. Jacob Zuma was accused of rape, and the 1 in 9 campaign supported his survivor. So I believe women when they say that they've been raped. I know that gender-based violence is systemic. It is a fundamental part of patriarchy. But what happens is that women are made to believe that rape is your problem. It's an individual issue that happens only to you. So I want to say to Martina, thank you so much for breaking the silence, not just for you, but for all the other women who are silenced by these institutions. And I think it's particularly important for a South African woman to raise her voice in support of this issue, because UNAIDS gives global guidance on the AIDS response. They are the body that sets the tone. In South Africa, we're very clear that there's a link between gender-based violence and HIV. There's a link between new infections and people being forced against their will to have sex, whether that's by the sort of traditional definition of rape, which is you get pulled into the bushes and you get gang raped by strangers, or the much more common occurrence of being harassed and pressurized and forced to submit rather than consent. And that happens in the workplace, it happens in the family, it happens within relationships, it happens at our universities and our schools. In South Africa, 1 in 3 girls will be sexually assaulted in a school setting before she's 16 years old. So we understand that this is a system of violence. And at UNAIDS, we cannot have a situation where the leader of the organization praises an accused abuser in a public setting, and then when is questioned on that, says, I'm sorry that people perceived that as offensive, it was not my intent. How can you not understand, as the head of an organization tasked with the global AIDS response, that there's a connection between gender-based violence and HIV? And when you support somebody accused of gender-based violence, you are going to silence anybody else that might have potentially spoken out. If you fail to understand that, you are not fit to lead the organization that has to address HIV in the world. Certainly not in my context as a South African. If you are unable to see the connection, and you are unable to recognize that as the head of a global organization that deals with an epidemic that predominantly affects women in the developing world, if you can't see that your solidarity should be with the victims, the survivors, and not the accusers, you aren't fit to head up the organization. So I think that we need leadership change at UNAIDS, and we need real independence and an enforceable set of recommendations, not just empty words put together by people that support the status quo. We need real change. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll take questions later.
Thank you, Larissa. I would like to invite now Ms. Prashanti Tiwari, who will be speaking by Skype. Yes, maybe I need some help.
India.
Yes. And Ms. Prashanti Tiwari is joining us from India.
Hello, Prashanti, can you hear us?
Yeah, hello. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes. And the floor is yours.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And I would like to extend my gratitude and thanks to the press and my friends at AIDS Healthcare Foundation and the feminist activists and advocates who have been standing for gender justice and women empowerment and upholding the rights of women such as myself or Martina. Against my introduction, I would just mention that I have been a former consultant at United Nations Population Fund in India, working to advance the rights of women and adolescent girls and endeavoring to promote gender equality in India. I was very happy, content, satisfied, and recognized for the work I was doing in India, but I never knew that in a deplorable twist of fate, I would one day end up imploring and pleading for justice and knocking every possible door to exercise my human and fundamental rights, only because my perpetrator is the country representative of United Nations Population Fund, who has been abusing his power and position to exploit women and enjoying immunity despite doing such heinous crimes. I have been a survivor of sexual assault and harassment at the hands of the senior most official of United Nations Population Fund in India, Mr. Diego Palacios. For months and days that followed the traumatic experience and harrowing experience which I had suffered, I was silent in fear, not knowing what to do. This man, Diego Palacios, however, continued to sexually harass me and abuse me and build pressure on me so that I bow down to his demands, and finally even offered to work with him, under him, in the country office in India. After fighting all these, which was equally traumatizing as the sexual assault which I had faced at his hands, I was completely repressed and suppressed to even raise my voice. I, however, confronted this person, my perpetrator, Diego, directly. I went to the Ministry of External Affairs requesting to waive off his immunity. I went to the National Commission for Women requesting and formally filed a complaint against him. I finally lodged a formal complaint with the police and a criminal proceedings has been initiated. So I raised my voice wherever I could and suffered severe backlash and aggressive retaliation and mistreatment from UNFPA, which is mostly the fate of women who actually raise voice against such crimes within UN. And this is what has happened with UNAIDS as well. The entire UNFPA came down, crushing on me, labeling me, defaming me, assassinating my character, snubbing my allegations as baseless, despite the fact, and negating it, even though if I had suffered those incidences which had ripped me of my existence and my integrity. Every second person in UN and UNFPA became a prosecutor, prosecuting me with utter disbelief and reputation. I was forced to give my statement before the Internal Investigating Agency of UNFPA, that is OAIS, which is a mere fact-finding administrative investigation, and which suffers from serious conflict of interest as the heads of the investigating agency reports to the executive director of UNFPA, with whom rests the final authority to initiate a disciplinary proceedings or not. And my perpetrator, Diego Palacios, has already been claiming in India that he has the support and the backing of executive director of UNFPA. I really fear that, what has been happening in UNAIDS and how justice is being impeded in case of Martina, and the perpetrators and the protectors of such perpetrators like Michel Sidibe, who is not stepping down, does not happen in UNFPA as well. Despite struggling for justice, everything is still at a standstill because this man, he enjoys immunity and I cannot try him in the court. I cannot exercise my judicial, fundamental and constitutional rights to try my perpetrator. I spoke about these incidences and facts which I have suffered only because what I have suffered at UNFPA or what Martina has undergone at UNAIDS and within the UN system is not just a standalone case, but it's endemic and pervasive, and it's thriving. One woman every second day takes her heads on the might of the UN and challenges the misogynist UN. In just first quarter of 2018, more than 54 women and young girls, many under 18, have reported sexual exploitation and abuse by UN personnel and staff. The way UN, UNFPA or UNAIDS have been, mishandling the cases of sexual assaults, for example, in case of Martina and Michel Sidibe or Louis, or they have been impeding justice in my case, in case of Diego Palacios, or holding contempt for victims, and have been treating the way they have been treating women who raise their voice against such crimes is actually shameful. The way these misogynist, manipulative leaders like Michel Sidibe or Diego Palacios continue to hold their positions and continue to be in power despite committing such heinous crimes or harboring such perpetrators puts a huge question mark on the entire UN system and the reforms that is required within such systems. The way UN is protecting the violators and keeping their positions and power intact while resorting to recourses like victim blaming, character assassination, defamation, and retaliation towards its complainant to silence and bury them is a testimony to the fact that the UN is increasingly becoming an embodiment of medieval feudalism, drawing its strengths not only from the archaic, antiquated policies, but also deeply entrenched patron-clientele structures that results in the murder of justice and supports a culture of impunity for perpetrators like Louis, Michel Sidibe, or Diego Palacios, and maybe many more to come. It raises serious questions on what are the means and mechanisms to hold such perpetrators responsible. Are there any independent agencies to investigate the issues and to bring those criminals? Hello?
Yes,
yeah.
We are here. We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. It raises serious questions. It raises serious questions on the leadership and management. It raises serious questions on the noble ideals of the UN, who claim to be working for humanity and advancing human and women's rights across the world. All this calls for a reformation, and it must begin from the home itself. The reformation must begin from the UN itself, from within the UN itself, from within UNAIDS itself, from within UNFPA itself, which preaches the entire world about women empowerment and justice and rights. It's time that the UN, UNAIDS, and UNFPA, and many more agencies where such crimes are committed, they now walk the talk. They stand against this culture of impunity which has been thriving within UN. People like Michel Sidibe should and must step down with immediate effect, and the Secretary General of the United Nations should take due cognizance and actions against him to show the entire world that the cover-ups for such perpetrators does not have a place at and within the UN system. UN today needs actionable reforms, including leadership change and concrete actions bearing impact, which includes stepping down of Sidibe as well at UNAIDS and proceedings against people like Diego Palacios in UNFPA, so that women are no longer victimized, abused by leaders who misuse and abuse their power and position, and who think they are above the norms of the ethical conduct that the UN is supposed to protect and uphold. The zero tolerance policy of sexual harassment and abuse within the UN cannot just afford to remain a blueprint, merely words of Mr. Antonio Guterres, but it must be implemented in reality. The UN should be responsible for cooperating with the law enforcement mechanisms and the criminal proceedings of the member state, as well as following the internal investigation which they resort to, and which is most of the time biased and never independent. Such cases should be tried independently and not by the bodies and the agencies of the UN, where it suffers from serious conflict of interest. And I would again close down with just saying that people like Michel Sidibe, UN should set an example by making people like and perpetrators like Michel Sidibe step down with immediate effect.
Thank you very much, Prashanti, for your contribution. And we will keep you, you will be with us because there will be space for questions, and we'll move to the next speaker right now. Thank you very much. So I would like to invite Ms. Martina Brostrom to share with us her thoughts.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming to this press conference. This press conference is important to me because tomorrow UNAIDS board will meet and they will be discussing sexual harassment. It will be the third consecutive meeting where reference will be made to my case, and yet there is no change. So in anticipation, I have written to the chair of the board, which is the UK representative, requesting to address the member states of this segment, and I'm still waiting for a confirmation to speak. Over the past few months, I have been struggling to be heard and to be believed by the UN system. First, in terms of the sexual assault I was a victim of by UNAIDS Deputy Executive Director Luis Lores, and then the subsequent retaliation of UNAIDS Executive Director Mr. Michel Sidibe. And as many of you know, following my complaint for sexual assault, a 14-month protracted and deeply flawed investigation concluded that my claims were unsubstantiated. The UNAIDS Executive Director leveraged this conclusion to publicly insult me, calling me unethical, unmoral, and a liar for reporting the abuse. The abuse, the shaming and naming has destroyed my career and my health. Following a publication of the investigation report by the Code Blue project, it became evident that the internal investigation was flawed, biased, and deeply unjust. And since that point in time, there has been some new developments. One, I received a letter from UNAIDS saying that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has requested that my case be reopened for a new investigation, and this will be the second time my case is reopened. Two, the UNAIDS Executive Director has changed his strategy and now embarked on a global tour to apologize for his mishandling of the case. To my knowledge, he has publicly apologized to staff during a global UNAIDS staff meeting, to civil society activists, and to the scientific AIDS community. I'm still waiting for his apology to me. Three, an independent expert panel is to be established to review the issue of harassment and abuse of power in UNAIDS, but many questions about this independent panel remains. How will the experts be selected? How will they have access to the full documentation and witnesses of cases? And how will they have access to true staff accounts of the organizational culture in UNAIDS, when the leadership will watch the move of every staff involved, and those speaking out run the risk of losing their jobs if they go against the organization? So while these developments are not progress, they at least give an indication that the UN is finally recognizing that I have been unfairly treated. But I'm no closer to receiving justice, and I'm very doubtful about these announcements, as I believe that they are only a public relation campaign in response to the media attention in my case. all the circumstances of the investigation remains the same. It's still an internal UN investigation fraught with conflict of interest. My stand on the issue is the following. 1. My assailant has left the UN system with full retirement benefits, and he has left praised by the UNAIDS executive director. That means that he is no longer a UN staff member, so he cannot be investigated by the UN, and there can be no consequences for his action. In addition, the 3 internal key witnesses in my case have been subjected to intimidation by the UNAIDS administration. 2 of the key witnesses have been put on leave, and the 3rd has left the organization after being notified that she was being outposted outside of Geneva. 2. The tears of Michel Sidibe that he is displaying as he's doing his tour of apology don't touch me, because I know that this is to ensure himself of a full salary for the 18 months remaining of his contract and a very good retirement package. In the meantime, he has destroyed the life of me and my career as a UN staffer. 3. If Michel stays as the executive director during the work of the independent expert panel, he will be in a very powerful position to influence the proceeding, and the integrity of this process will not be protected. 4. Several months ago, Michel Sidibe pledged to eliminate sexual harassment and abuse of authority in UNAIDS. But the recently released UNAIDS staff survey shows that compared to last year, the situation in UNAIDS remains exactly the same. Out of a sample of 465 men and women who participated, 18 people reported having experienced some form of sexual harassment in the past 12 months, and 201 people of 465 participating reported having experienced some form of abuse of authority in UNAIDS. 5. I want to challenge Michel Sidibe's recurrent claim that there is gender parity in the leadership positions of UNAIDS. Indeed, the distribution of grade, which is an official recognition of seniority and which is reflected in salary, is positively biased towards men. Out of the 49 director posts, only 18 are occupied by women, and only 3 out of 10 senior management posts are held by women. So today I'm participating in this press conference because I want to call on the board of UNAIDS to take action to address the situation in UNAIDS and to end sexism, cronyism, and patronism prevailing in the organization. I request that the PCB dismiss UNAIDS executive director of its duties so that the organization can be a safe environment for women and continues its important mandate to respond to the HIV epidemic globally. At the very, very minimum, I would like to call on the board to suspend Michel Sidibe from his position as executive director during the course of the independent panel investigation to avoid his interferences, and which is well provided for in UNAIDS policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. And I would like to invite Terri Ford, the Chief of Global Advocacy, to make her intervention.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here today, particularly Martina and Larissa, Prashanti, and Martina have really laid out the issues better than I can. But I just want to start to say that we believe the women. We believe Martina, we believe Prashanti, and the other women that have made these claims, and that's an important thing to establish, that their voices are heard and we believe them. These women are facing sexual harassment in the UN system, and then following that, a whole other assault on them following speaking up. And that's particularly disturbing and not right. When you have the courage to speak up and then you're attacked, it's a double assault. Part of AHF's foundation is, in our mission from day one, is fighting for what's right. And that's what we're trying to do here. Sexual assault is not right, under immunity that the UN has. Abuse of power is not right, but particularly cover-up of such actions is especially not right. It may be even worse than the initial assault. And that's what we're fighting about today, especially when that comes from senior leadership of any organization. So we believe that there's been an orchestrated, as Martina has laid out, and Prashanti, PR campaign, about this from Michel, by Michel Sidibe to defend himself, but to defend the system of a culture of acceptance and complicity with sexual harassment. And that, the theme here is what is right and what is wrong, and that is wrong. And we're not going to accept that. We applaud the women that have had the courage to speak up against that. So we want reform in UNAIDS and the UN system. Prashanti's from UNFPA. What we're seeing, that this is throughout the UN system. It's not just UNAIDS, but we are AIDS activists. We are the largest AIDS organization in the world. And we are saying this is not right, and we're not going to follow UNAIDS on this. How can we follow a global organization that's supposed to be leading the AIDS movement with this kind of example and behavior? It's not even possible. And UNAIDS has lost the integrity for AHF to follow. So I'd like to say, if Michel Sidibe, actually really cares about the things he professes emotionally to care about, which is people living with HIV and AIDS, the sustainability of UNAIDS, and the community unification, then he would put himself aside in his own personal interest for the greater good of the cause and step down. Because there's no way for this to heal and for reform to happen with him in place although yes, he has apologized for making some of these mistakes, but these mistakes are not acceptable. As the leader of that, if he truly feels he made major mistakes, when you make major mistakes, the CEO of any company around the world, whether it's in Hollywood, politics, sports, if this was happening, the head would have to step down. That's what's the right thing to do. And it's unbelievable that he is just fighting for himself, not the community, not people with HIV/AIDS. He needs to step down. So we want real action. Like Martina said, this is very timely. The board of UNAIDS is meeting tomorrow. We're asking them, urging them, to take the charge that they have, to make that change in leadership, so that whether it's suspending or dismissal, either one, this reform effort of this new panel must happen independently. The other thing is, you may hear about, is that they created this new panel and there's a new process and it's supposed to be independent, and we don't see that. We've looked at how this panel is formed. It's driven by the Secretariat Office of UNAIDS. There's conflict of interest throughout the whole process of this new panel, so we don't see that that's going to be the solution. But there's that panel can be changed, it can be fixed, but that process cannot happen while the executive director who has created this cover-up is in place. So that's what we're here today. We're here to urge. First of all, we're here to applaud Martina, Prashanti, and other women that have had the courage to face this. Some have said, what are their motives? No, like Martina said, their lives have been ruined. Their careers are ruined. So why would they be making this up? Why would any woman make up, these kind of accusations that are not true? There's no benefit to them. It's only a hard road ahead, and we're proud at AHF to stand up against this, to defend these women, and to say once again we believe them. Happen immediately, not 6 months from now, not a year from now, not 18 months when his contract runs out. We want it to happen now. So thank you very much, and I think we'll be able to take some questions.
Yeah, so thank you very much for these presentations and your statements and testimonies. Now I would like to open the floor to the questions, please.
Hi, my name is Ben. I work for the AFP News Agency. Just to start, Martina, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to something. In a previous media appearance, I believe in London, you said that women at UNAIDS are treated like window dressing. This, as you were probably aware, triggered a response from a lot of women within the organization who said, notwithstanding serious allegations, it's demeaning to all of us to say that we are all treated like window dressing because we feel like we do important work. And about 300 women, I think, have signed this protest. Maybe you could just respond to that. The second one would be, there was concern, I think, expressed when the investigation was reopened that this would be sort of an attempt to slander you. And I'll speak frankly, that it might be an attempt for UNAIDS to establish that you in fact had a consensual relationship with Luis Flores as part of a broader attempt to undermine you. Based on what's happened so far, do you believe that that is the intention of the new investigation? Or what sorts of questions have you been asked in the context of the new investigation that leads you to believe it's not serious?
Okay, maybe if I just start by answering the first question. I did see the outcome coming out of London. I think it's unfortunate. I mean, I was speaking to my own experience, and I do believe that the quote was taken out of that context. At the same time, I think that the statistics of the new staff survey, which I've just cited, speak for themselves, and that was the basis of my claim. And finally, I think that I believe it's a little bit less than 300, and I think it's an important 1/3 that has not felt coerced to sign that staff survey, that staff petition. In terms of the second question, you know, I was informed by CNN actually that my case had been reopened. At that point, a few hours after I received the phone call from CNN, I received a formal letter. To date, I have not received any information regarding who has opened the investigation, what's the scope of the investigation. Like I mentioned, the assailant has left the organization and can no longer be investigated, or there can be no consequences for him. The key witnesses has been moved. There is no new evidence in the case. The burden of proof in terms of UN, the way that they assess it in terms of DNA's confession, will not be present. So I know nothing more than you do about the actual investigation.
You and your lawyer, nobody from UNAIDS or UNIDS?
So I have been trying to inquire about this. The only thing I received from UNAIDS, as I mentioned a couple of hours after the CNN, was the fact that the investigation would be open, and that said it's because of the new information. I am not aware of any new anything other than that, and to date I have not heard anything.
And so sorry, just one follow-up quickly there. Presumably, this is now a time to really, in your review, highlight the Secretary General's role here. The investigation was reopened in his name, according to UNAIDS. It was an instruction from his office in New York.
Yeah.
So, presumably, at this stage, would it be fair to say that you now believe the Secretary General has been negligent in his management of this situation?
Well, I would say that the investigation, with the little information I have at hand, is already fraught with conflict of interest. So, with the help of my legal representative, I have written for clarification to the Secretary General about this. There is a conflict of interest on the fact that the Secretary General has publicly come out in support of Michel Sidibe, and at the same time he's the head of this investigation. Tedros, who is the WHO DG, is supposed to oversee the investigation, but neither Luis Flores, who has left the investigation, or Michel Sidibe reports to him. They report only to the Secretary General. So right there's a conflict of interest. My first investigation was handled by the IOS, which is based in WHO in Geneva. Now, they obviously has been now publicly recognized to have been done a poor job with the first investigation, but they report to the WHO Director General, so it's very unlikely that the current investigation, where the decision maker in the case is the WHO DG, is going to conclude that his own unit was doing a poor job. Now, the investigative part is handled by OIOS, which is a unit in New York, yet the decision-making has been delegated to the WHO DG. So this is a historical fruit salad that has actually never been done before. And with regards to the other things that you were purporting regarding the motivations, I have never heard of them. I wouldn't wish to speculate what are any of their motivation. As I stated up front, I believe that reopening of the investigations serves several purposes for them. It provides the independent expert panel to not be able to look into my case because that's now it's an open investigation. Second, I don't know the scope of the investigation, so it's not clear to me, what's the nature, what's the scope, what's the terms of reference, and finally, like I said, who will be overseeing the investigation, because I did receive a notification via my legal employer that the Secretary General is now claiming that he has not opened the investigation and it has been done by UNAIDS. So even though UNAIDS is saying it's the Secretary General. So there are some confusions there, and I have not been able to elicit answers to my questions.
Can I also just say something on that? I think what's super instructive is that I was able to meet with Michel Sidibe when he was on his worldwide tour of kind of image rehabilitation. I was one of 5 activists that met with him in South Africa, and he apologized for any appearance of impropriety. He apologized if anybody was offended by what he said. That's not the same as apologizing for what he said in his defense of Michel. That's saying, if you experienced this, that's not how I intended it. And there's a quote that I really love by an author called Joanna Russ, which says, "The boys throw stones at the frog in jest, but the frog dies in earnest." Whether it was his intent or not to cause harm, he did cause harm by his words, and he's unable to see that. The second issue is this investigation that's ongoing effectively serves to silence Martina, because every time I have asked, they've had a number of meetings. In Geneva last week, they had a meeting discussing sexual harassment at UNAIDS. They invited activists from all over the world. They didn't invite one of the people that reported gender-based violence in the organization. When I questioned why Martina herself had not been invited, they said, we can't invite her to speak because that's under investigation. So this investigation, which nobody seems to have clear terms of reference for, effectively silences victims because they're now unable to be included in consultation processes because the investigation is ongoing. How much longer must it be ongoing? When was it announced?
In January of 2018.
We're 6 months down the line. We still don't have terms of reference. We don't know who's running it. All that does is silence people. And it's divided civil society in the same way that those women from UNAIDS were mobilized to write a letter of support. We've had, within the African context, activists being mobilized in support of Michel Sidibe, which has divided civil society. We have feminists now arguing amongst ourselves because one group of women is being seen as colluding with Michel, and another group of women is being seen as being used as pawns by Western influences. And it's damaging the AIDS response. At the end of the day, this is about a global pandemic. People are dying while dinosaurs fight, the grass is being trampled. And how can you have, this is systemic. It's not just about one isolated incident. That's how gender-based violence is perpetuated, by having people believe these are isolated incidents. They are not. And they have to be addressed as a system of oppression that's driving the AIDS epidemic.
I just want to say something about the Secretary General. Your question is that we feel that his response has been deficient. We absolutely feel that. As the Secretary General of the UN, he oversees all of this. And I'm not going to point by point what he needs to do, but what he needs to do is a much better job at managing this.
Okay, another question? Yeah. Yes, you and not Stephen.
Oh, no, okay. The question is for everybody who's on the panel, and I think it begs to be asked. You're talking about this issue, you're saying we believe the woman. Obviously, it goes without saying that this issue, the Me Too movement, you've tapped into something right now in terms of the cultural zeitgeist, if you will. But as I look at the panel, I see 4 white women, 4 ostensibly cisgender, upper middle class women, women who have the platform to do something like this. And in a lot of cases, you have women who don't have the platform. They're alone, they're silent, they can't orchestrate any of this. What would you say to them? How can you help them in a practical way? Because for me, if you say we believe the woman, it has to be all women, and it has to, you know, come from a circular level. It can't just be women who have the power to orchestrate this.
Well, there are 5 of us, and Prashanti is with us too. So, that way.
Well, firstly, it's been a very long time since I've been called a cis woman, so I don't know if that's a thanks for that or not. Okay, I mean, I would argue I'm gender non-conforming, but that's a conversation for a different panel. I think, firstly, what's important to recognize is, while yes, I'm a white woman and yes, I have white privilege, I'm also African. I'm from South Africa. I was born in South Africa. I live in South Africa. I'm a South African activist. So while I would never presume to speak for African women, I am an African woman. Maybe kind of a minority, but still. And I was assaulted in that context, in an African context. I've worked in gender-based violence in the context of Africa for decades. And so, again, I'm not representing kind of African women broadly, but I do think that I understand the context. And I also think it's really important to recognize that while I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody, I'm part of a coalition of organizations across Africa that have been speaking out in support of Martina, in support of women who have been sexually assaulted, not only within UNAIDS, but within other civil society organizations. And so all you can do is create the conditions where it is possible for women to speak out. And AHF has been doing that in South Africa in particular, but also Nigeria and Kenya, where we have events called the Silent Protest, which is a space where survivors of sexual violence can speak out about their own oppression using their own voice. So this panel is only one representation of the work that we do across continents.
Yeah, and to add to this, because we recognize that we are all white, right? We can't change it, right? But we invited to the panel two African activists, non-white African activists, who unfortunately could not join us. So a representative from Treatment Action Campaign and also another female activist, feminist. They unfortunately could not join us, but they were to join us via Skype.
And have been very outspoken on this issue with us.
Yeah. Okay, merci, thank you, Monsieur.
Mark Hingelhardt of German National Public Radio. Question to Ms. Brostrom. Have you received any signals from the board's members ahead of the meeting tomorrow, like they might support your case and your call?
As I said, this is the third time that my case is being mentioned. There has been a coalition of 7 countries raising attention to my case in June meeting of 2017 and also at the December board meeting in 2017. I am in contact with some of the member states. They have reassured me of their solidarity and support. I have no specificities about what they intend to raise. I have only appealed to them to make this segment and made an address to a request to the chair of the board that I come and have an opportunity to address the member states directly. I think a lot of them don't have adequate or have biased information with regards to my case.
So that is one thing that we do urge the board tomorrow, to welcome Martina, who is here in Geneva. They're all in Geneva, the meetings happen, it's on the agenda, and Martina is right here. So we're wondering why they haven't accepted her request to address them tomorrow. So we hope that they do.
Thank you.
Camilla from Swedish Nationalbladet. We've been called for Sidibe to leave for some time now. It doesn't seem that he's trying every way not to leave the organization. If he's now, after all these efforts that you're making, he's still staying, how do you think he's going to affect UNAIDS, the organization, and the fight for against this?
I can take that first, but very detrimentally. You know, we look, if he is, you know, his contract, I think it's 18 months, 15 months, you know, that's an 18 months of confusion, priorities, you know, missed, people that need urgent care not getting it around the world. We're already seeing that in our own, we operate in 40 countries. Many of our countries the staff have been called by the UNAIDS office in that country, like why are you doing? It's all causing diversion and distraction from the work we're trying to do. We have a sense of urgency to help people that need to be tested and treated. This is all a waste of time, money, and effort away from the people that need the care. And that is primarily in Africa, but around the world. So your question is very good. It will be very bad for the AIDS movement if Michel Sidibe does not step down, and that the Secretary General does not take action, and that this board doesn't take action, because the funds will not be used properly, the time, effort, and the sense of urgency will be lost, and lives will be lost. We really honestly think that if this is not resolved, lives will be lost because of all of this misfocus, on fixing this and reforming the system. So it's a very good question.
Yeah, maybe I would just add to that by saying that the leadership of the UN, who leads the HIV response, it's a role where one has to be very bold, I think, to move the agenda. That means on a lot of sensitive issues, including issues of gender equality and human rights related. When one is themselves the subject of an investigation, or when one is the subject of media scrutiny, it's a little bit difficult to play that role, I think, effectively.
Thank you. John?
Yes, good morning. I'm John Zarakostas with The Lancet. I was wondering if you could give me your thoughts, given all these incredible problems in UNAIDS. Some people have suggested that perhaps it's time that the organization was folded back where it started under Dr. Mann, back into WHO. Would that be a good idea or a bad idea?
May I? Yeah, as a UNAIDS staff member, I believe that UNAIDS was born because we needed more than a health sector response to the HIV problem, and I think that continues to be the case. The UNAIDS existed before Michel Sidibe. I think it was a thriving organization, and I hope that it will continue to exist beyond him. I am aware, for example, in the Secretary General's remarks at the launch of the AIDS response, that there is more and more talk around AIDS cannot be a single issue, and that AIDS needs to be folded into broader health sector response. Again, I fear that that's really detrimental to the movement. I think that there are a lot of dedicated activists, and it's a flourishing civil society. The AIDS response is unique in that sense, and I think that UNAIDS has a key role to play if it can be effective and deliver for people.
I think that's also a good question. We feel that UNAIDS is in a crisis moment right now, a fork in the road, which is what your question is does UNAIDS need to exist or not? And we're not against UNAIDS, disintegrating and falling. We're actually trying to create reforms that are real so that the UNAIDS response can be a primary focus. In the U.S. and around the world, there's just one day a year that AIDS even gets any notice, and that's December 1st, World AIDS Day. One day a year. That's not enough. I mean, millions of people still do not have treatment, millions. So, like Martina said, if it gets folded into a broader effort, we really fear that the focus of, those millions of people that need life-saving treatment right now, and millions don't even know their status. We're not done with AIDS. That's another thing that AHF, we always want to emphasize. There's still a crisis. The war on AIDS must continue, and we will also support UNAIDS as well, but we will not support UNAIDS under this type of leadership. And it's actually detrimental to keep it that way. On WHO, we have a lot of respect for WHO, and we would like to see that effort within WHO bolstered. Over the past several years, Martina may know exactly more, but the HIV/AIDS unit, I know in the World Health Organization, has been defunded. I mean, they've lost staff. It hasn't been bolstered. So WHO, we do support WHO being bolstered and fostered in a stronger response. And whether that's working in a different way in relation to UNAIDS or not, but we absolutely feel that both of them need to have stronger support and leadership.
I would also agree with that. I think we're not calling for the destruction of UNAIDS. We're calling for it to be effective. We're calling for it to be supported. We're calling for it to be well-led. Because at the end of the day, in South Africa alone, we're seeing 250,000 odd new infections on an annual basis. And there is still a treatment gap. In South Africa, there are 7.2, according to the latest statistics, around 7.2 million people that are infected with HIV, and we have the largest ARV rollout in the world at around 4 million people. That's an enormous effort on behalf of the government, but it has to be supported globally. And we want UNAIDS to succeed. We need UNAIDS to be successful. You can't pretend that HIV is like every other disease. It's not like diabetes. There's no stigma around diabetes. There's no stigma. You know, if you have cancer and you stand up in your church and you say you have cancer, everybody prays for you. If you have HIV and you stand up in your church and you say you have HIV, everybody starts saying, well, how did you get that? And there's judgment and there's a morality that comes with it. And to disconnect those two allows the virus to continue to kind of be, you know, reinfect people. And I mean, going back in history, Ronald Reagan said that he was making funds available for the research of AIDS when he was funding the study of the common cold because it was also a virus. Like, taking away UNAIDS as a focal point to drive the AIDS response is a mistake because it allows then, you know, any kind of study into a virus to be claimed as AIDS research or to be claimed because it's addressing, you know, the compromised immune system. It has to be specific. This is a specific problem.
And one of the things is that, you know, we're rooted in advocacy, so we're advocates, AHF. And when we've done this advocacy, I've been doing it for years and coming to Geneva and all, we had to try to understand why isn't WHO speaking up more? You know, what is UNAIDS doing? And what I was always told was that that's not WHO's role to be the advocacy voice. It is the role of UNAIDS. And so we got that clarity. Okay, that's good to know. But now the question is, how do they have any integrity or authority to be that voice in advocacy with this type of leadership? We can't follow that leadership. So that's the problem. There's a problem right there between the two. UNAIDS is charged with being the advocacy voice. Now, how could they possibly be the advocacy voice for women, you know, around the world with this situation and the way the women in UNAIDS and that survey that Martina referenced, you know, shows there's a major problem here. And again, that board tomorrow is meeting and they have to take action now for the sake of the lives of those women around the world and all people living with HIV and AIDS.
Okay, last question? Or?
Let's go.
Good morning. I'm Oliver from Amsterdam as a volunteer at AHF. First of all, thank you for your courage to speak up. My question is, is for everyone, compared to the situation in '94 in Africa within the UNAIDS, when matters have improved, how do you expect a positive outcome in this issue of misconduct, of sexual harassment, and would Sidibe stepping back be sufficient enough?
Okay. It's not sufficient enough. I'll jump to your last question. It's the start. That is not sufficient because obviously there's a systemic, you know, there's a major problem here, and on lots of levels in UNAIDS and the UN. One issue is the immunity. The whole issue of immunity, of you know, you can just basically do whatever you want to anybody you want, and you can't be held accountable. That has to be changed. We know that there's a reason for that, and in diplomatic realms there has to be a system for that. But it's beyond. So that has to be reformed. So the first step is change of leadership. The second is a lot more work. That's a lot. That's just one. That there has to be a unbiased review of this, and with recommendations again that can be followed and that has some meat in them. So, what was the first question? The first point
is how can you expect a positive outcome in this issue of misconduct when we see that within UNAIDS in 94 in Africa the situation the matters have been improved?
Well, I think I'll leave that to Martina, that the positive outcome must be a fair result for the women that have come forward. So there's, for myself, I would say there's no positive outcome here until the women like Prashanti, Martina, and others, there are others, are really, addressed, first of all, apologized to and acknowledged, and that, there's some kind of healing in that situation for them. I would like to see, I worked with Martina before this ever happened. I would like to see Martina back at UNAIDS. UNAIDS needs Martina there. So that's one step. But also Prashanti and others, fairness and a just outcome for particularly the women, but also then long term, a safe environment within UNAIDS and the system for people to speak up and just go to work every day and not be sexually harassed or fear for outcome, from your boss, if you do the wrong thing. So the whole system needs to change. It's going to take a lot of work. But again, there's a board of UNAIDS, and it's their responsibility to make this happen. It's meeting tomorrow. But Martina, do you want to address what would be a positive outcome for you, being from UNAIDS? How do you see that?
No, I think in terms of getting justice for what Luis Lores did to me, that's not going to happen because he left the system. But I would like to see exemplarity when it comes to Michel Sidibe, who is still serving in his position, because he has been condoning and been very complicit in the cover-up of this case. I think there is a long list of errors that he has committed to. They are well known, and yet there is no accountability. So I would like to see some accountability at the very highest level of UNAIDS' leadership. I agree, beyond the exemplarity, I'd like to see some reform. I think that reform process is not a policy process where we sit and review the policies. I have went following, all the provisions were there for me to go through an investigation process, but my case, like so many others, I believe 98% of all cases that are actually investigated end up being unsubstantiated, because the burden of proof in the UN internal investigation is much higher than most national legislation, which means that you need DNA evidence, even then there's for discussion, or you need confessions, which, the whole process is set against the victim. So in terms of reform process, I think it's not about a hotline or information sheets or all these things that encourages women to report, because I was one of those women who did report. What we need is accountability, and so that those people that do mistakes, as Michel Sidibe being called on here, people know that there is really no tolerance. And when we say zero tolerance, we mean that in practice. It's not just something we put as a nice logo on our policies. So accountability would be one step in the right direction for me.
Merci, Monsieur.
Other questions that maybe first of all, former UNAIDS staff. I was Chief of Corporate Services at UNAIDS. I left a bit less than a year ago. I want to thank you, Marina. I think the problem at UNAIDS is far beyond sexual harassment. I've been mobbed for 4 years, and one of the many cases that have been not attended by staff. It's not only about Michel Sidibe. There was a poor internal justice at UNAIDS. There was another deputy executive director, Jan Vigo, was in charge of internal justice. She was in my case, the perpetrator. She was promoted as USG in charge of management in New York. The Guardian has raised a number of issues because I'm not the only one. We are about 5 or 6 to have a pending or investigation that has not led to any results. And again, Secretary General, through the head of communication of the Secretariat, has supported this manager. So I think the problem with UNAIDS is far beyond sexual harassment. Thanks to all of you for your courage, because I think it's very important. But the UN, and for all of us who have been serving the UN, I served the UN for 50 years. I was in the bombing in Baghdad. I was in nasty places, but after 15 years, I could not take it anymore, and I left the UN to serve in other organizations dealing with HIV/AIDS, where I'm happily serving a good cause and not facing so far, and I hope not in the future any problems, but I think HIV is critical, and we should distinguish between what is happening to UNAIDS, and UNAIDS needs to remain, because there are lives behind UNAIDS, and we need to separate this from the people who are unfortunately at the end of UNAIDS. But thanks to all of you for that correction. It helped us to move forward.
Thank you. John, tu veux encore poser une question?
It's okay.
Ok, alors John, et puis après, dernière intervention de Boris.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on the gentleman's comments about touching on Jan Bingle. When she was at UNAIDS, she's now in New York, and she's the officer that the Secretary General has delegated to oversee the reform of the whole UN system on harassment. What are your views on this, and is it possible to have an arm's length relationship given what all these allegations about this officer who insists she was cleared?
I mean, my view on the whole thing is Jan Bingle was obviously the deputy, the other deputy in UNAIDS. She was aware of what had happened in my case. She was playing an advisory role to Michel Sidibe. To what extent he took or did not take her advice, I'm not privy to. It's true that she was in the hierarchy of Michel Sidibe. So what I have just said about the environment and how it works, you know, she was subjected to that herself as a woman working in the organization. From my perspective and from my experience, with the investigation process, I'm not able to comment to the investigations that she has been subjected to. I certainly have my own experiences, and she has not been an enabler or helpful influence. I have come to learn that she was indeed being investigated at the time as she was being promoted in the UN system. And it seems to me that if after several years these are the same surveys showing the same, like I said, the same sexual harassment problem prevails, the same abuse of power, and people are giving us reasons for not reporting, that they don't think that basically the reason most cited frequently for reporting ill treatment, discrimination, abuse of authority and sexual harassment in UNAIDS is believing that action will not be taken, followed by concern about retaliation and not trusting the organization to keep it confidential. Then I see it as problematic that the same policies as has been deployed in UNAIDS is now being deployed at the United Nations global level.
Thank you. Boris?
Yes, Boris Anderson, a freelancer with bad hearing and who hardly talks English, so I only ask you a very general question. There were rumors in the time of the previous Director General at WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, that the actual job was performed in bed, in five-star hotels, during workshops abroad. Have you ever heard this kind of allegation? Because if I have to believe the leaks I got, it was of a rather broad scope, but at the time it was not easy to be a plaintiff. So, have you heard the allegations on things which continue for years apparently? And if you want to show your solidarity for the silent victims, what will you do?
Well, I'm happy to add from the UNAIDS insider perspective. I think it's important that outsider perspective is also shared. From my perspective, yes, I would have to say yes, affirmative. I have heard about such a situation, and it is my experience that that is ongoing in UNAIDS. Yeah.
No other comment?
Well, I would just say that we hear this a lot as well. It's what you hear, or not. We don't have proof of that, but when it's a constant thing that you continue to hear, there's a problem.
Can I maybe just add to that? I don't think that UNAIDS and the UN is unique. When you create a situation where there are unequal power relations and where you create an impression that you will have progress in an organization or access to resources if you capitulate to sexual advances. That's not unique to UNAIDS. That's across a range of different industries that remain male-dominated. And this is a much larger problem that needs to be addressed. We need to start talking about the systematic oppression of women across different contexts. So that's beyond the purvey of this one press conference, but it's not unique. The reality is, absolutely, we've heard of abuses from peacekeepers, from staff members within UNAIDS and other UN organizations, within civil society organizations, Oxfam. In South Africa, Equal Education is a civil society organization that has had the head of their organization removed because of sexual harassment within the workplace. And there's this belief that if a senior manager is showing a very junior staff member sexual attention and they don't overtly say no, then it's okay. You have to factor in power relations. Even if it's ostensibly a consensual sexual relationship, if that junior staff member is conscious that them saying no will impact their career in the long run, how realistic is it for young people, black and white, across different contexts, to really say no? And this isn't just women. This also affects young men starting out in careers who are sexually harassed, who are people try and convince them that maybe they should engage in sexual activity. Because that's a toxic culture, and that is driven by toxic masculinity and rape culture. And UNAIDS isn't the only organization that suffers from that. That's across the board.
Can I just address something about Hollywood? Because actually AHF is, our main office is in Los Angeles. So obviously everybody knows about what's gone on in Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey, a lot of examples here. But they were removed. Action was taken even at that highest level, and they don't have immunity. It's very hard to prosecute, as we learned with O.J. Simpson, celebrities for crimes. But Bill Cosby is going to go to jail, and Harvey Weinstein is going to go to jail. And there's no avenue for any of these people to go to jail in this immunity system of the UN, and that's not right. So it's a system that doesn't allow justice, where other systems, like Larissa said, this happens in all industries, but there's mechanisms to handle it in those industries, and perpetrators can be held accountable. What we're concerned about in this system, there's no accountability, here, and that's not right. And that's a long-term goal. Going back to what's going to be the cure for this? What are we going to be happy with? It's a long-term fix of a major problem. I think the word here is accountability, and that's what we're fighting for.
And maybe just to add one sentence, I think the problem is that once you do report and you start this investigative process, basically, because the system is internal and there is no external oversight, the UN plays the role of police, judge, and jury. And I think that that's where the victims are disadvantaged.
If I could just end quickly by saying, instead of just talking about what we don't want, what we do want is we want an African woman leading UNAIDS. That's what African women are called. HIV in the world in 1994 was very much a gay man. The face of HIV in the world now is an African woman, and we believe that UNAIDS should reflect that, and new leadership should be an African woman. That's what I want to put on the table.
Okay, so I think it's now time to conclude. So thanks again for your interventions, your answers. I think it was quite interesting. We could continue with the coffee, but we'd like to thank you again, and all the best.
Thank you all for coming.